Henry I was King of England from 1100 until his death at the end of December 1135, roughly from when he was around 32 years old to his mid-60s. He was the fourth son of William the Conqueror and the third Norman king to sit on the English throne. He was an educated man and was also known as Henry Beauclerc, which translates from the Norman French as good scholar. Though his reign was long and successful, ostensibly because he was a harsh, uncompromising warrior king, towards the end it was marred by tragedy caused by the death of his only son, William Adelin. This event would throw the last years of Henry's reign into a panic, as the king desperately tried to produce another male heir. The loss of his son would also have repercussions long after the king's death, with the disputed succession causing a civil war in England. Let's take a look at where Henry I fits in our timeline of kings and queens. He's here, crowned at Westminster Abbey, around 850 years before Queen Elizabeth II was crowned there. Historians think Henry was the first of William the Conqueror's sons to have been born in England, in around 1068, 2 years after the Norman invasion. He's thought to have been born in Selby, making him a Yorkshireman, born if not bred. Henry's ambitions as a child probably didn't extend to him one day becoming king, given that he had older brothers who were in line for the job before him. His eldest brother Robert Curthose was destined to become king, and if that didn't work out, there was his older brother William Rufus, who we looked at in our previous video. As mentioned in that video, it was his brother William who inherited the English crown when their father died in 1087, mainly because Robert and his father fell out and went to war. The origin of this falling out is thought to have involved Henry and his older brother William playing a nasty prank by emptying a chamber pot over Robert. Robert was furious and demanded that William and Henry be punished. When the king, William the Conqueror, failed to do so, Robert literally went on an angry rampage across Normandy and even laid siege to Rouen Castle. Instead of becoming King of England and the Duke of Normandy on his father's death in 1087, William Rufus was given England and Robert was given Normandy. The kingdom was split in two. As the younger son, Henry inherited a substantial fortune, as well as land in England. An outraged Robert soon began plotting to invade England and to seize the crown from his younger brother William Rufus. Robert's planned invasion soon started faltering though, and he turned to Henry for a loan, which Henry refused. Instead, Robert sold him the Cotentin Peninsula, making Henry the Count of Western Normandy, though it wasn't long before the dastardly Robert seized the peninsula back. Despite this, Henry raced to his older brother's defence in 1090, after William Rufus encouraged locals in Rouen to rise up against Robert. Henry fought the rebels back, and even took the leader of the rebellion to the top of Rouen Castle and threw him off. Soon after, William Rufus invaded Normandy with a large army and forced Robert to the negotiating table. Incredibly, the warring brothers seemed to have come to an agreement. William would gain lands and castles in Normandy, and in exchange he would help Robert attack the Duchy of Maine and regain control over Normandy, including Henry's lands. The two brothers even nominated each other as heirs to England and Normandy. Henry must have been furious that he'd been completely excluded from this arrangement, and it's possible this resentment would prove significant later on. In 1091, Henry gathered an army together and declared war on his older brothers. The plan failed, and he went on the run. Despite their negotiations, the dispute between William and Robert seems to have continued until Robert decided to heed the Pope's call and join the First Crusade to Jerusalem. Needing money to raise an army, Robert effectively sold Normandy to William Rufus. It's also around this time that Henry and William, the childhood pranksters, seem to have been reconciled. As we explored in our previous video, William Rufus's 13-year reign came to a brutal, shocking end one day in August 1100. The king was out hunting when he was shot through the lung with an arrow and died. Historians have speculated that William could have been the victim of an assassination plot instigated by Henry. Henry was in the hunting party on the day in question. Is it possible he'd never quite forgotten his betrayal 9 years previously, when William and Robert excluded him from the negotiating table and sequestered his land? We'll never know. Most historians have rejected the murder conspiracy theory though. Hunting was a very dangerous sport, and accidents did occasionally happen. Nevertheless, Henry's next move was fairly ruthless. Leaving his brother's body in the forest, he rode to Winchester to secure the royal treasury, then hastily made his way to Westminster, where he had himself crowned King of England just 3 days after William's death. Henry was king, given that his older brother Robert would almost certainly return from the First Crusade and try to press his claim to the English throne. As per his agreement with William Rufus in 1091, Henry made it his business early on to consolidate and legitimise his rule. He proved himself to be an astute politician, promoting himself as the king who would restore order to his troubled kingdom. Despite being the third Norman king to sit on England's throne, Henry I turned his face towards the old Anglo-Saxon kings to define his early rule, in order to boost his popularity with his English subjects. As you'll have learned from our previous video on William the Conqueror, England had been transformed by the Norman invasion of 1066. More than half the land had been taken over by Normans, and even the official language had changed from Anglo-Saxon English to Norman French. Henry I's promise to return to the gentler customs of Edward the Confessor, one of the last and most admired Anglo-Saxon kings, who who you can learn more about in our previous video on him, proved popular. Not long after being crowned, Henry took a wife, Matilda, the daughter of Malcolm III of Scotland. Given that she was the niece of the one-time Anglo-Saxon contender for the throne, Edgar Atheling, the marriage not only boosted his Anglo-Saxon credentials, but acted as a useful buffer against any potential future troubles from the Scots. Matilda was a trusted queen, and she often acted as Henry's regent in his absence. Unlike his older brother William, who died without a male heir, Henry I and Matilda produced two children, a daughter, also called Matilda, born in 1102, and William Adelin, a male heir born in 1103. In fact, Henry is perhaps the mirror image of his brother in this respect. Not only did he have a queen who bore him an heir, he also had several mistresses who bore him an astonishing 24 illegitimate offspring. Henry I may have done all he could to consolidate his power, but by 1101 his brother Robert had returned from the First Crusade and landed his army in England, intent on taking over. Fortunately, the two brothers seem to have settled their differences, perhaps deciding that peace was better than a destructive, expensive war. The brothers signed the Treaty of Alton, under which Robert recognised Henry as king. In exchange, Henry gave up the lion's share of his claims to Normandy and agreed to pay Robert an annual stipend. That could have been the end of it, but Henry I was ambitious and secretly didn't give up his designs on Normandy. In 1105, he sent his friend Robert Fitzhamon to Normandy with a group of knights. Fitzhamon was captured. In 1106, the two brothers went head-to-head at the Battle of Tinchbury. Robert was defeated and captured. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Henry I declared himself the Duke of Normandy, and the two kingdoms were united. Though the matter now seemed settled, not everyone agreed with it, and in 1116, Henry was forced to fight off a rival claim to the duchy from nobles supporting Robert's son, William Clito, who was still a boy but about to become of age. Henry successfully fended off two major assaults on western Normandy. Peace was concluded in 1120. With the kingdom secure and the succession settled, things seemed to be looking up for Henry. After 20 years of turmoil, perhaps he could finally relax. Well, unfortunately not. In November 1120, the king and his son decided to make their way back to England across the English Channel. The king and his retinue set off in one ship. His son William planned to follow, sailing in another vessel, the White Ship. Chroniclers at the time recorded that 300 people boarded the ship with Henry's son and started drinking heavily. The drinking and revelling got so bad even before the White Ship had set off, some passengers, including Stephen de Blois, the future King of England, disembarked. The ship set sail in the dark and out at sea struck a rock and started sinking. Henry I's only male heir climbed onto a small boat and could have escaped, but when he heard the cries of his half-sister thrashing around in the sea, he ordered the boat to turn back. His rescue boat was swamped by desperate drunken passengers and sank, drowning the future King of England. A devastated Henry was suddenly left without a male heir. Despite having 9 other sons, all of them were illegitimate and so were not able to succeed him. His wife Matilda had died 2 years before the tragedy, so he almost immediately remarried and tried to produce another male heir, but there would be no new children. Once again, there were machinations to place William Clito, the son of Henry's brother Robert, into the line of succession, but this ended in 1128 when Clito died after being wounded on the battlefield. In desperation, Henry declared in 1126 that his daughter Matilda would inherit the throne. Unfortunately for Henry, it would be another 427 years before England accepted a woman, Mary I, the daughter of King Henry VIII, as the monarch of England. Matilda's husband, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, had died in 1125. Henry, keen to use his widowed daughter as a political pawn, married her off to Geoffrey Plantagenet. The couple reportedly hated one another, but they still managed to produce a future King of England, Henry II, who we'll cover in a later video. By now in his mid-60s, King Henry was once more forced to travel to Normandy to suppress yet another uprising, this time by barons in the south of the duchy. According to a chronicler, it was here that he ate a surfeit of lampreys and fell ill. Henry I died in December 1135, and his body was interred at Reading Abbey. In the confusion following his death, the son of William the Conqueror's daughter Adela, Henry I's beloved sister, seized the throne. Henry's daughter Matilda would later invade England with an army to press her claim instead, unleashing a bloody civil war in England. We'll take a closer look at all this in our next video when we cover the reign of King Stephen, who ruled England for just under 19 years. If you've enjoyed this video, you can hit the subscribe button below to receive an alert when we upload our next one. You can also help us to keep making these videos by sponsoring us on Patreon using the link below.